you have children with special needs and you're telling them how dangerous that this virus is and how deadly it is, suddenly these children are absolutely terrified. They don't want to go to school because the government are fear-mongering, making people so scared that those vulnerable children who aren't able to question and sort of push those things, they suddenly think that there's absolutely no option. So Zoe couldn't make it into school.
Overdrive.
Hello and welcome to Sketch Notes on a Pandemic. I'm Lucy Johnston, Health and Social Affairs Editor of the Sunday Express. Today my guest is 17-year-old A-level student Lucy Thorne. Lucy wrote an open letter to the Prime Minister published in the Sunday Express describing how the pandemic policy affected youngsters like her. She describes what she sees as the dystopia of living and studying in lockdown, how friends have been targeted by online predators, and how she's missed key coming-of-age moments. She also describes her bleak vision of the future and how she believes generations to come will be paying the COVID debt. If you're interested in these and other conversations like this, please like and subscribe to the podcast. We've got many more guests coming up. So welcome, Lucy. Tell me, why did you write to Boris Johnson?
We were, at the time, we were being kept off of school. After Christmas, we were all completely shut in our houses and there wasn't really much we could do. And the government weren't giving any clear outlines on what they were going to do. And there was very little support for people who were stuck at home. So it was essentially a plea asking for more clarification and just a little bit of help for my generation, because at that time we were so completely lost and without guidance, and it was quite desperate.
What sort of guidance did you want? I mean, the government was kind of clear, stay at home, save lives, and we're trying to suppress a virus. What did you see among your friends? And I know you've got a little sister, haven't you, Zoe? So what were you looking for, and what did you see happening around you?
Well, my little sister has quite severe emotional difficulties, and she goes to a school for children with those difficulties. And she essentially needs constant support and guidance. And with coronavirus and the way things were, with the government deciding to keep schools open and suddenly deciding to shut them and then being unclear on whether or not they were ever going to open again this year, she was completely lost. People like her, they lost the framework for their lives, and they were completely abandoned by the government. And I think for so many other children as well, even without those emotional difficulties, having their whole lives completely thrown apart, especially with exams and things like that, which most young people hinge, their whole lives on. When those are taken away and you lose that structure, suddenly, even if you are a very stable person, you can become very unstable and emotionally quite vulnerable.
Did you find that your sister did? Did you see it in her? I know you helped her quite a bit, didn't you? Because she didn't have the teaching that she would have had face-to-face teaching. I think that's right, isn't it? And she didn't have that. So how did that sort of play out with her?
Well, she can't teach herself anything because she gets so stressed and upset when she's trying to learn. She can't manage it at all. So she really, really needs one-to-one guidance. And I think for a lot of young people, they can't teach themselves things, especially if this is new stuff. They don't know the things to begin with. How are they supposed to teach themselves it?
Talk me through that, because I think a lot of adults just say, "Oh well, were they? You children were all learning online, and that was safe, and how was that? And at least you're at home." What is online learning actually like, and how is it, different? How is it? Is there any way in which is it better in any way, or is it absolutely worse? And what do you have to do? Why is it different?
Oh, it's so much worse. Yes, I think a lot of people. I was really, really fortunate because of my school. We did live lessons, but even then it was horrible because you had the teacher talking at you and you couldn't really reply. And over the lesson, people's cameras would slowly turn off as everyone sort of dipped out and went off to make themselves a cup of tea or just went on their phones, because there was nothing stopping them from, being distracted. They didn't have to pay attention. There were no real consequences. So
why were there not consequences? Is it because you can't really give detentions or? I mean, it's really interesting to talk to you about this because people don't know. They think online learning is a good solution to stopping a virus, but actually it's not as you see it, perhaps not learning in the same way. Did you, I mean, talk in detail, but, could you learn as much?
Well, no, because there's so many easy distractions. Even I absolutely love school. I love spending time. I love learning. But even having my phone on my desk or just my computer, getting these notifications through different websites, different things I could be looking at, suddenly learning became so much harder because there were other things coming at me. My mum and my sister were outside walking around and talking. I could hear them. And the learning environment just suddenly became so difficult.
So these, you go to, I know you have a bursary, don't you, and a scholarship to your school. So you had a good school and a good online learning experience, but presumably you have friends that perhaps didn't, and perhaps maybe share, if you can, some of the experiences of other people you might know. Or I'm not saying your experience was a good experience, because clearly it wasn't. And it was, would you say that, could you even put a number on it? Could you say that actually it's 10 or 20 or 30% of what you should be doing? Obviously the teachers can't look at your work, they can't interact with you, you can't really, it's not teaching in the same way that we knew it, and they didn't know what they were doing either, I suppose, or hadn't practiced that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll use my sister as an example again. Her school, because it's a school for children with special needs, they had lessons in person as well. But so because her school was doing it in person, they didn't have enough staff to do it online as well. They had no live lessons. They'd send them out PowerPoints about the teaching to go alongside those PowerPoints and worksheets. And I ended up, after my lessons finished, I had to sit with Zoe and talk her through these PowerPoints and talk her through these worksheets just so she could complete the work she needed to complete.
So how
she
old
barely
is Zoe?
worked at all. She's 15.
15.
But,
and so she chose not to go into school because she was frightened of coronavirus. She could have gone to school had she not been so frightened. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, the vulnerable children includes those children who have those disabilities and difficulties. And if you're pushing this narrative of how dangerous the coronavirus is to people like that, then of course these children will not want to go to school, because you're saying they can, but they don't want to when this thing is being pushed that they're all in so much danger.
And
it
so
doesn't even affect them.
Sat her down and said, "You're not at risk, Zoe. You know, it's not a risk to you, and you should go to school." That she wouldn't have understood that.
Well, that's the thing with anxiety and things like that. It's not rational. It's never going to be rational. You can't rationalize those things. So you're asking children who are unable to rationalize you're telling them irrational things and then asking them to rationalize it. It just won't happen. It doesn't work like that.
So her experience was, in fact, you taught her yourself. So that must have impacted on your workload as well, because not only did you have online learning, which did you find it gave you more work sort of thing because you self-teach?
Yeah, I mean, well, I had the lessons, but then the work, it's this really horrible thing you get with online work as well, because you just put it off because there's so many things you have at home that you can do. So I had a lot of friends that ended up writing essays at 10 p.m, 11 p.m. that were due in at midnight because they just had put it off right until the end. And they ended up, everybody I know had their grades dip over that period. And my school had to mark people differently because of how much our grades dipped when we were at home.
So you were demoralized, it sounds.
Yeah, I mean, I ended up feeling really terrible about my grades because, I mean, they weren't bad, but they weren't what I was getting when I was at school. And even now I'm still sort of recovering from that. And it is very demoralizing thinking that you're not doing as well because of something that's so out of your control.
So do you feel that the messaging could have been different and that the government could have just said, you know, children are not at risk of this, and actually people, you know, teachers, unless they're over 65, they're not at risk either? Do you think that that could have been an important message to get out and wasn't properly communicated?
Yeah, I think so, because I mean, it wasn't, the schools didn't have enough guidance, and still now they don't have very much guidance on what to do. And as young people, we didn't have very much guidance either. We're not really told. We don't really watch the news on the whole, because we're obviously teenagers. So there isn't this level of communication from the government to us. And the way they do try to contact us through these adverts that we get are like, they also don't kill your friend's nan and things like that. That's all the adverts we get, like, don't meet up with your friends because your friend lives with their nan, or your friend has asthma and you could kill them if you meet up. And it's just the only communication we get from the government is saying that we're the problem, when really we can't be super spreaders if we don't have symptoms. And if we're not really affected by it, then why should we be so limited? We understand the problems it causes for older people, and we're careful. But for us as a social group, we don't really have that much of an impact on each other.
Do you think then that the way you've been treated, you could say, or the way you've had to behave over the past year has had a detrimental effect on your generation? I know you may have friends that you've mentioned before that have, had mental health problems. What are your kind of worries? Surely you're robust and children are meant to be very resilient. Why would you think this is important to highlight?
There's going to be a generation of people who are emotionally and socially stunted, I think. They haven't had the practice. They've missed years about a year now of socialization. They've only socialized with their parents. They've lived in an echo chamber for so long. And now they're going out into the world and they're going to have to relearn all of those social skills, especially for younger children. When their social skills are so, they're learning them at this point. They won't really know. Even as teenagers, these vital experiences that we're meant to have to help us become adults and learn how to act in the adult world. We're going to go to university, live on our own, and we won't know what to do because we've lived with our parents. We were stuck in a house with our parents being cared for completely. We didn't have that chance to get our independence as teenagers. So how are we going to get that independence when we move out?
Yeah. And there are certain rites of passage, I suppose, or certain moments in your life, key moments in your life, developing relationships with people. Sort of what kind of social experiences do you think have been important and that you may have missed? And we don't even know whether we're not going to have another lockdown. I hope not, but we can't be sure because we've been told that there won't be another one, and it was 3 weeks to flatten the curve. So yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. What sort of things are you thinking about?
Well, for teenagers, of course, I think relationships are a really big one, because when your first relationships as a teenager are what sets up, the basis of what a healthy relationship should be for an adult. Is how you experience those things and then are able to navigate that world as an adult. But if you don't have those experiences as a teenager, and you don't learn what's supposed to be healthy, what's not, what's okay in a relationship, and how to work with another person, then you can end up with people who are in dangerous relationships and don't know. They're experiencing those things for the first time as adults, and that shouldn't be happening, because that's when it gets a bit more worrying, I think, if you don't know how to navigate those things. And I think that a lot of things like that, people's first kisses, things like that are so fundamental to what being a teenager is, going to parties, making out with someone when you're a bit tipsy. It's just what teenagers do, and it's what we can't do because the government aren't letting us anymore.
Do you think the government lost sight of these important things and didn't really include them in their policy making?
Well, I think they're not thinking about the long term, because humans never really do. They don't like thinking about what's longer than they are. But for young people, I think these experiences that they have as teenagers impact their adult lives so much. And the government just aren't thinking about what impact this will have on a whole generation as adults. If they're just trying to polarize a whole group of people against them, then they're doing the right job. But they're absolutely ignoring every single thing that we want and what is important to us. And I know that it sounds selfish because we're supposed to be protecting the older generations and all that, but it's not really like that when we're shouldering the burden for everybody else and we're not getting anything back from it.
I'm going to ask what you think could be done now, if anything. And one could argue it's too late in some ways. But I remember we've talked about the online, the dangers online. And because children have been locked in their room for a year, effectively, or on house for a year, those online dangers we've seen from the Internet Watch Foundation. I think there's been a huge explosion in online images of young children, I think as young as 9, out there. Tell me what you have heard about that and what your fears are about that among your generation. Other older generations may not even understand how that could even come about.
this is a danger that a lot of older generations don't seem to understand, and they think is the one that's very easy to avoid because they don't know what it's like. But there is this, when people are stuck at home, they talk to people online because that's the only way you can communicate with your friends. And as a result, they'll meet new people from different schools, different areas that they don't really know. And even though those relationships are online and you're not really physically threatened by that person, emotionally, there is a threatening level there. So I've had someone who tried to tell me that if I didn't send them revealing images of myself, they would hurt themselves in certain ways. And I blocked them immediately because I didn't, I thought that was horrible. But other people who aren't able to make those steps and sort of get pulled into that, they worry that it's their fault. They feel like they're responsible for what this other person's doing. That's so dangerous. And that's how it happens. It's emotional blackmail, really, that makes these people get those images out of children. And then, of course, those children are then exposed and vulnerable online, which is absolutely disgusting. I mean, it should be policed more online to begin with. There should be a stricter sort of
is it not policed?
Watch on what children are doing.
Is it not policed? No, what kind of apps I mean, obviously, how do people get hold of you? Surely you could say teachers teach you and school tells you don't ever talk to anyone that you don't know. But I know that's not happening. So what's going wrong?
Well, there's a few apps, one specifically that's essentially like a dating app for teenagers where you swipe left and right on who you like and things like that, where it's so easy for people to target young people and pose as other young people because there's so many things that are specifically designed for teenagers.
Younger one. What's the young teenage app?
Yubo.
Oh yes, yeah. No, I've heard of it. Yeah, so it's to meet people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a clone of Tinder essentially, but for teenagers, and that's who it's targeted towards. But there's so many creepy people on there who are trying to get to young people and sort of manipulating them. And I know so many people that have that app and have met people online through it and met up with them afterwards.
The app, people are meeting people online that they don't know. Don't you all know not to sort of? Well, I suppose you're vulnerable. And tell me about that.
Well, of course, we know not to meet people online, but then I think that's the whole thing. Every teenager knows that one of the first rules is to ignore your parents a bit because they know what's best for you, but they're strict and they say some things you just don't believe. It's why teenagers are famous for doing that. They've always rebelled. It's what they do. So when you have people telling these teenagers, don't meet up with people online, don't talk to strangers online, don't send photos of yourself, of course they're going to do it because they just want to rebel. So then you get into these really dangerous situations where you have teenagers being taken advantage of, and there's absolutely nothing between them and these predators that can stop it.
And do you think the
government haven't?
Yeah, well, has the pandemic exacerbated the problem as far as you're aware?
Absolutely, because you have people who are lonelier than ever, looking for people to meet, looking for friends online, people to talk to, because their own friends are busy or feeling low themselves. They look for people online, they can very easily get taken advantage of because they're more desperate than ever to find that socialization that school used to be and has been taken away from them. So the government, by doing this, has made children even more vulnerable than ever to predators, essentially.
And do you know of children or young teenagers that have actually done things online that you would worry about? And what sort of
absolutely.
Not identifying anyone, but people that have posted images and things have come wrong for them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've had friends who have spoken with adults online who posed as younger people, or spoken to adults who told them that they'd buy them things, or sort of manipulated them into different things of sending images of themselves. And it's the most demoralizing thing, I think. When they've spoken about it, it feels disgusting. It makes you almost feel dirty when you've done it. And
so I think a lot of these catfishing, when someone poses, am I right? I might have the wrong term.
Yeah.
When someone poses as a younger person and then sort of tricks them almost into sending images, and then they're actually not. But how and then it's revealed that they are not a young person and they're older person. I mean, is that what happens?
Yeah, it happens a lot because a lot of the time, these people aren't those 40-year-old men who are sat and creepy. They're 20-year-olds, in their early 20s, 20-year-old men. And they sound like they're our age. They can look like they're our age, but they're just not. But it's easy enough for them to pretend they're 18, 17, who look a bit on the older side. And that's convincing enough. Or even a 19 or 20-year-old who's being honest about their age. But as a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old, you already feel like you're practically an adult, even though you're not really. So you start to think it's okay for me to mix with these people who are older than me because I'm basically an adult myself and you're just a child and extremely naive and immature still.
Yeah. So that's a worry, and the pandemic's exacerbated that. What do you sort of fear for for your own future? Do you fear that your prospects will have been limited by the debt we're in, and do you sort of trust the government and have as much hope as you did, or do you think your generation or you feel that things have been taken from you in that way?
I think that my generation will be picking up the pieces of this for the rest of our lives, and so will our children. We're going to be having to clean up all this mess when we sort of get old enough to take, when my generation gets old enough to start taking power, we're still going to be cleaning up after what the government has done. And I think the debt that we're in, I'm going to be paying it off the rest of my life. So my children, my grandchildren might finish paying it off, but I don't even know because I think it's scary how much debt the world has seemingly accumulated over this time period and how terrible the economy has gotten. And for me, thinking about careers and university and all of that, it makes me more anxious than I would have been anyway, because I'm entering such a tumultuous environment and it's hardly stable and there's barely any jobs. I can't even find a summer job to get work experience because there's barely any jobs on offer. And the ones that are have such fierce competition because everybody's unemployed at the moment.
What were you looking for, Lucy? Just anything?
I've been anything really. I just kept applying to loads of different things, different fast food restaurants, different restaurants, just waiting, customer service in different shops and things. But there's so many people that are applying for these jobs because they've lost their own jobs. So many young people who are looking for these jobs, but there's barely any because barely any companies can afford to take on new employees at the moment. It's just, it's quite desperate.
Yeah. And how does the sort of, did you have a feeling of loneliness? How does that manifest itself? Sitting in your room and, just to go back over those days, and luckily you're back in school now. And I do want to talk about being back in school, but those days in your bedroom, on your desk or wherever you were, just talk me through what that was like.
Yeah, it was lonely. I think between every lesson, I'd just sit there and look at my phone for a bit and then I'd be back in the lesson. And after the lesson's finished, you'd feel sort of socially exhausted because you've been listening to people talk for ages and ages. So you don't really feel like you want to talk to anybody immediately. But then you also feel so lonely because you haven't been having the back and forth that you usually have with people. So you've been talked at and it leaves you feeling tired, but you haven't really been talking to anyone. So you just gradually become more and more alone during that time period. And I was fortunate that my friends sort of pestered me into calling later in the days and things like that. And we all played video games together and just chatted. And it was really nice. But without that, I think it would have, for other people, I'm sure so many people across the country didn't have those friends that nagged them into doing things. And if you're not being nagged by your friends, you just start feeling more and more alone because you start feeling unwanted. And I think it must be absolutely horrible for some people.
Did you see sort of friends sort of, their joy de vivre, or did it happen to you, just sort of feeling just low, really, just even depressed?
Yeah, I had quite a few friends who really struggled with their mental health. I think they went more downhill than they would have otherwise. They really struggled.
Did any feel better about being in lockdown? Did any enjoy being at home and like being with their parents that you know of?
I think quite a few people were excited at the thought of not being at school, but the novelty very quickly wore off because no one wants to be stuck at home. A lot of people don't like school, but they like seeing their mates, and that's what what makes their day. That's what makes going out and going to school enjoyable. And they didn't have that.
Is it presumably someone face to face, having that interaction. I mean, some people have argued, older people have argued, well, they're all right. They've got WhatsApp, FaceTime, Zoom calls, we've got all the technology, it shouldn't be such a big deal. What would you say to that?
Absolutely not the same. Because, I've only met up my friends once this Easter so far, but just seeing them in person again after a few days of not being at school was such a relief, because even though we've been phoning and talking, it's just absolutely not the same. It's almost being with those people and getting that physical response to you talking to them. You can see their body language. You can see them smile when you're talking to them. It's so different to just hearing a voice. You're getting the response that humans need, that response from someone else. That's how we sort of communicate. And without having that response, it's just absolutely not the same. It's not fulfilling.
In our DNA. So that brings me to school now. And you're, there's a bit of a drop on the line, but I think we were right. You're masked, tested every day, sort of, seen as potential. Well, even though you have a test, you then have to wear a mask, or expected to wear a mask. Many schools are being quite forceful on that. Does that cut through your social structure in the same way? How do you feel about school now? Is it just great to be back, or actually does it feel different?
I love being back, but I think we all miss how it was. Even the teachers miss it. We're all sat far apart, but then when we stand up and leave the classroom, we're walking down thin corridors and we're all just jostling together in one big group. We're going through the motions that the government is making us do, but it just doesn't work in schools. It's never going to work in schools. You can't expect young people to stay apart from each other, because at that age, we're really craving physical intimacy. Of course, that's going to happen. We're being kept apart from different year groups. We have friends in different year groups who want to spend time with us and just can't. It's just not, it's almost like there's this black and white structure the government's trying to impose on us, and school's never been like that. And it's never going to be like that. You can't, yes, it is. I really love school. I love learning, but the social part just isn't the same. And that's what's most important to a lot of people.
So you can't see you in the year above. You can just look at them afar.
I walk past them sometimes. We sort of smile at each other and say hello, but
you miss them.
We'll get in trouble if we sort of spend time together.
Gosh, yeah. So going through a day, can you just sort of pick out moments that seem like there's an arbitrary rule which actually doesn't really work? For example, lunch. Do you sit together even though you have to sit apart in school classrooms? I mean, as you say, it's not a system that's well thought out or particularly working. Run through the day if you can.
So I think at lunchtime, where the seats are all sort of separated, so we're facing no one. We're all, 1 seat apart. But that very quickly sort of descends into chaos, because everybody piles onto one table. They all want to sit together. Everyone's shut. You don't want to sit facing nobody. Everybody scooches up so they're opposite each other so they can look at each other while they're eating. And there's not really much that the school can do, because the government are making them do that. It's not like the school wants to do it. They're being forced to by the government, but it's not really like it's ever going to work, because humans need to be looking at each other when they're talking. You can't expect them to sort of sit facing nobody and sort of not look at the other person while they're talking, or lean their body towards the other person. That's always what's going to happen. There's these rules the government is making the schools comply to, and they're they never really work out, because kids don't really care because it doesn't affect them, and they want to spend time together. They've missed each other. They haven't seen each other in so long. Why would they want to keep staying apart when they've only just gotten back together?
So what do you think's going wrong? I know it's not really for you to sort of know much about the SAGE group and everything, but do you think there seems to be a kind of misunderstanding perhaps of I mean, I think you said to me once, there's a lot of figures and a lot of data and a lot of modeling, but actually, I mean, talk about what you think about, what's going wrong. Do people know what their lives are like?
I think there's this huge disconnect between teenagers and older people. And I really think there shouldn't be, because everybody who's older has been a teenager, and when they're making these rules for young people, they should just remember what it was like to be one, and remember what it felt, how they would have felt in these situations, what they would have done in response to these rules. And if they can imagine what they would have done and how they would have felt, then the rules should be able to sort of accommodate what teenagers do. There should be guidelines and help and support and education for young people to help them understand coronavirus and help them realize the consequences. And I think enough young people in our country are responsible enough to understand how they need to be for the elderly. Like my friends and I, when we meet up, we test the day before just to make sure that we're not going to be, spreading anything. We're all careful, but we want to see each other. You can't. There's rules that teenagers simply will never follow. I think.
Yeah, so perhaps a bottom-up approach, educate, advise, and bring people along with you, rather than a top-down approach by trying to force people into unnatural, humanly unnatural situations, because it just doesn't work. Is that sort of what you mean? Yeah,
I mean, as well, I think with the big push on vaccinations and putting young people last, I understand that the elderly need to get these jabs before everybody else. But there was this South Park episode recently about vaccinations where the elder people were sort of taking over everyone else and sort of acting like they were way better than all the young people because they could get all these jabs. And that's just what's happening. Young people are being forgotten both with medical resources at the moment and with the laws and the rules. We're being left behind, I think.
When the government has said it's going to put money into helping mental health and helping Generation Lockdown, as it's been called, and giving extended school days, what is your view of that? Do you think it's sort of too little too late, or
I think extended school days are never going to help, because that's not going to help anyone's mental health. They don't want to be at school longer than they have. They like seeing their mates. They don't want to be learning for longer than they have to. And the more money towards mental health is great, but CAMHS, as it is, the mental health service for young people, is so strained with the amount of young people it has. Throwing more money at it won't really help. They need to help. They need to sort of rebuild CAMHS from the ground up, I think, because the system simply cannot cope with how many young people there are with these mental health issues. And they couldn't cope before coronavirus. So how are they supposed to cope afterwards? There aren't enough staff to sort of give therapy to all these people. Having extra money to hire more staff, train more staff would be great. There needs to be sort of a different approach to young people's mental health, sort of even within schools, just to help almost compensate, because services like CAMHS really won't be able to cope, especially after the pandemic.
Do you think, is there not enough mental health provision in schools? They don't have necessarily a trained counsellor. And the government is also quite, there's been a lot of talk about apps for helping mental health, and perhaps that's not going deep enough into everyone's mental health problems. Different, isn't it?
I think in schools, the schools do the best they can, really. They don't have enough. The schools don't have enough resources to provide for young people. They have one counsellor who, but for the problems that young people have, especially nowadays when there are actually more and more mental health problems, probably as a result of social media and things like that. There should be extra provisions to compensate for those changes, especially with coronavirus, and there just isn't. And with lockdown and things, those provisions for counselling and things like that at schools weren't made available to people online in lots of schools. So it's a difficult time, and now they've all gone back, and these resources are probably going to be even more strained than they were in the first place.
Do you know people that have had trouble to getting mental health help?
The CAMHS waiting list is ridiculously long. It takes months and months, and unless you're about to actually seriously hurt yourself, they can't allocate any resources to you until they've gotten enough people through in the first place. So my sister went through CAMHS and she had a really hard time getting in, and even now they can't put as much energy towards her as they should be because they're so strained. And I've had friends that have had mental health issues and have been really, really sort of unstable, and the CAMHS simply have not been able to help them, even though they've gotten to this point in their life where they're saying, I'm ready to accept help. When they actually talk to a doctor and say, I really need help, then the doctor goes, okay, there's about a 5 months waiting list, and then you'll get help. And after 5 months, anything can change. That person might not be ready to accept help after 5 months. For young people, and especially for people my age, where they're about to turn 18, in a few months we won't be eligible for CAMHS anymore. So what are they supposed to do when they're sort of at the brink of becoming an adult? And who do they turn to?
Yeah, there's a gap, isn't there? A gap in the system. I think it was a money saving thing again. What about summertime? There is a fear that we'll still have to be socially distancing and mask wearing on this June the 21st. I don't think there's a VE day for coronavirus, but, it's about, what is an acceptable level of risk? And for you, what happens if it is decided by whatever SAGE or the modelers that it's not acceptable for you to meet together at a festival or meet in big groups, or you'll have to be distancing or wearing masks? How will that feel for many of you?
I think we'll all be quite devastated because, and this is a big mistake, I think, with giving dates in the first place with the government. If they can't, they should give a date if they know they can make it. If they can't make it, then say they'll give a date as soon as they can, or give just a smaller time frame in which that date will probably fall. But for young people, we spend our whole lives working towards dates, exam dates. When school begins, school ends. We work towards those dates. So if we're given a date, we'll work towards that. And if that's taken away, if the rug's ripped out from underneath us, we're suddenly left, without anything to sort of work towards. That's what happened with GCSEs and A-levels last year. And even now, I think, when I found out my GCSEs were cancelled, the rug was taken out from underneath me because I was working towards those dates. And I was sure that that was what's going to happen. If that's taken away, all the plans everyone's made, everything that everybody's looking forward to is gone. People's mental health will suffer. People's socialization will suffer. Everybody will be suffering, essentially.
So it would be pretty devastating.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't know what they'll do. Just going back to the GCSEs, I forgot to touch on that, but were you unhappy that you weren't doing your GCSEs? Presumably you've been working towards those for many, many years of your school career. How did it feel to be suddenly told you weren't doing them, and the flip-flopping of policies? How has that affected you and others?
I remember watching it with my mum, who was sitting and watching it as Boris Johnson said that they were cancelling them. And I just immediately burst into tears because it was just this. It was the Easter, and I was about to start revising, and I just frantically emailed my head teacher, saying, "Please, can you give me some more guidance on what I'm supposed to be doing, because I don't know if I should be revising or not." All we were told is that it was cancelled and something else would be put in its place. We weren't told what that was, whether we needed to revise. And the Easter holidays is such a pivotal moment for revision. It was just I think it's one of the most stressful moments of my life, probably. Just this frantic worrying about what this was going to mean for me and my A-levels and my university in the future. It was just, it was really, really horrible.
And it happened again, didn't it, for the GCSEs this year? They didn't know until, a bit earlier. They had a bit more notice, but they're still sort of a bit all over the shop. So would you have rather just gone through the exams, done them online or any other way, than have that kind of uncertainty? I think that what you're saying is uncertainty and then change of policy is actually quite, it has quite a big impact, more perhaps than maybe the government realizes when it makes these decisions, perhaps. Or yeah, what do you feel?
I wouldn't have wanted to have my exams after online school, because I think I would have felt completely unprepared. But I think if I'd been in school, if I was able to go back to school, I would have taken my exams in a heartbeat, because I'd worked so hard for years. I'd taken myself to that place where I was ready and I was revising and I was so prepared. And having that taken away, it's just the worst feeling, really. And I think that the government don't really realise how important, they put so much emphasis on these exams now. They're one of the most important things for teenagers. They make them seem like their whole lives depend on these exams, and then they take them away. It almost makes it seem completely pointless, and everything you've been working towards your whole life means absolutely nothing. Yeah, it was just really awful.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I feel really sorry for the A-level and GCSE students this year.
Yes. Yeah. What about your sister? How is she doing?
Not fantastic. She's she's doing all right. She's working really hard at school. She hasn't been in full-time education since she was 11, so she only makes it in a few days a week. So more than ever, I think her her education's suffering. She's struggling to maintain the grades that she needs to take her GCSEs. She's taking them next year, luckily, but her school was going to enter her for a few this year, and she just isn't going to be able to because she hasn't been able to spend enough time at school to sort of catch up the things that she's missed. So I think a surprising amount of children struggle to make it into full-time education. And for all of those children, it's going to be so difficult to recover from this.
Yeah, her life chances then have been impaired by this, as have so many others. What do you feel about those people who are making decisions, and how do you view them? Do you sort of see people sitting in houses with big gardens, sort of looking at risk factors and numbers, and, you know, what do you think needs to happen in order to kind of perhaps put some balance? Do you think there's been sort of not enough you know, what do you see? How do you see decision makers? What goes in your head?
They're so abstract, I think. It's so easy to look at all these numbers and not see the people behind them. The fact that there are, you know, behind all the deaths, that there's a face, there's, you know, families and people who have stories to tell behind every single death number. Every single person that's had coronavirus has their own story to tell. And behind every person that's had the vaccine, they're all people with their own stories as well. But the government just look at these numbers and almost see how well they're doing without the impact that they're making on all of these people. And I think that if they just spoke to the people that they're impacting by making these decisions, if they could see what the normal people want, what they think is best for the country, as well as what the government thinks, what the normal people think would be best for their lives at that moment in time, perhaps their decision making would just be a little bit more careful.
Are you talking about the people that are affected by the measures as well as the people that are affected by coronavirus?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that, so for example, if the government about reopening schools, if they spoke to teachers, if they spoke to students, not just the teachers, you know, the teachers' unions, the representatives, but the actual teachers who are sat in the classrooms, the actual students who are facing these things, when they're thinking of cancelling GCSEs, why can't they speak to GCSE students and find out what they think about these things, just to help them make these decisions, almost to defend people who can defend and sort of make a case for these different things, depending on their emotional outlook on these things. I think that would impact decision making a huge amount.
Yeah. So in fact, there's no counterbalancing body to mitigate or to balance up whatever measures are being imposed. So it's all very well suppressing the virus, and those are what the measures are for, but there's no one looking to the effects of those measures. Yeah. I mean, what do you think? Do you reckon we should have some kind of, for your generation, some kind of youth parliament, or how can we improve your voice, which is obviously what we're trying to do today? But
well, we're completely underrepresented in government. I mean, the parliament is essentially just older men. For the majority of them, they're all older men. And I think that they don't represent a huge amount of the population of the UK. We're such a diverse nation. And I think there's so many different age groups and people, different cultures that live here, and they don't have any representation in Parliament. And I think that there should be more representation for young people in Parliament, at least having young people come in and speak and weigh in on these decisions. And even older people, you know, people of every age group who can almost represent themselves, because I think that would be so important, especially with this country going forward from this, recovering from this. Mm-hmm. I think every single age group should be represented in the decision making.
And women, do you think they're underrepresented as well? They've built a blunt yeah.
I mean, you see, I watch debates sometimes in Parliament, and it's essentially just, you hear them all yelling, and it's just a chorus of male voices. And I think it's, I think that it's more important people are elected based on merit than their gender and their race and things like that, because I think merit is so important. But I do think that perhaps people who have those merits are being ignored to favour other people. So I think that it's so important that we get more people of different races, more people of different, like more females, more people of different genders in Parliament to represent different people, because we are a diverse nation and we should have a diverse Parliament.
Do you have sort of aspirations for the future? Do you feel, I know we've touched on how you feel you'll be cleaning up the mess that's been left, but do you feel hopeful for your future for the future of others, or do you feel a bit bleak?
I think it looks a bit bleak at the moment. I do worry about it. I think we'll be okay as a generation. I think that we'll recover because we can support each other, and as we enter the adult world, there will almost be this kinship between people of my generation because we've all suffered this, all suffered the same thing. I think that no other generation will have gone through. But I think when we first enter the adult world, we will almost be looked down on by older people, especially because we've missed a few years of education. Perhaps we'll be seen as less, especially applying for jobs. The person who's missed a few years education because of coronavirus versus the person who's had a full education, that the person with a full education seems so much better than the person who's missed a few years. I think things like that could definitely impact my age group.
So, two of the things, we were talking about how your generation is robust. The government is putting money towards helping your mental health now. And therefore, what's not to, why are you worried? You'll come through, and Bear Grylls has talked about resilience among children, and there is money aside for you to help you recover. And I think a lot of money has been put for mental health. What's your concern over that?
I think we're resilient to an extent. Every person has a breaking point where they sort of feel that they can no longer push through. And I think that for a lot of young people, they've reached that point because of this. It's so much psychological stress, more than they've ever had in their whole lives, and probably will have in their adult lives, because this is so extreme. It's like a once in a lifetime thing. And to go through this as a young person who's, is still developing, is still learning things, it's going to impact us the rest of our lives. It's going to impact our decision making, the way we view things in the world. And I think this whole notion of resilience is find people who have already become who they are. They know, they're very firm in who they are. They're completely sure of themselves, and they can recover and become who they were once again. But for young people who still aren't quite sure who they are, this is shaping them. And who we will be as adults will forever be the people who suffered through education during coronavirus.
Brilliant. Very, very well put. And so do you fear that, not you, because I think you're very, you've got your head around a lot of it, but for some people, they may have, it will inform their development, and it may have affected them sort of indefinitely. I suppose we don't really know. It's like a massive experiment, isn't it?
Yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. It feels a little bit like we're guinea pigs for some kind of dystopian future where everybody stays in their houses and looks at a screen and no one really communicates. It's just, it does feel dystopian. I think this whole being stuck inside and looking at screens, and I think for a lot of people, it's definitely going to impact them. But we don't know how. We don't know how to compensate for these things yet. We don't know what decisions to make. And history will know. People will look back and think, oh, they should have done this. They should have done this. We will never know. We're going to have a whole generation of people with mental health problems, I think. And we don't know how to fix that right now because it's never happened like this before.
Dan's question, sorry, was about how do you feel you could be better represented? What would you do to try and improve your voice in Parliament, really, or in decision making? What would you want?
Well, they do have youth members of Parliament, and I think that perhaps they need more input into general debate, more general discussion to be listened to by Parliament. And of course, there's the petition feature on the government website. But even more than that, perhaps young people should have more of an opportunity to make contact with the government, these people who are so abstract and so far away from us. Make them more, make them closer to us. Let us see them. Let us almost interact with them and know the people who are making these decisions. Let them see us. Let them know the people that they're impacting when they're making these decisions. I think that's so important that they know the impact of their decisions. They can see it rather than just talking about it in a room and listening to other people yelling yay at them and things like that.
What do you want to do? Do you know what you want to do, Lucy, when you go, well, you've grown up, but when you as a job eventually, do you have any thoughts about that?
I really want to be a professor of English literature and do academic writing and things like that.
But we've had this idea that the government wants to bring in these vaccine passports for large-scale events, and we actually don't know down the line, once that technology's there, we really don't know whether it will be implemented elsewhere. Given that you're not a priority for vaccines, and nor necessarily would the risks outweigh the benefits. We don't really know the long-term risks of those vaccines, but we know you're not a risk of coronavirus. How do you feel about the idea of perhaps discriminating against your generation for introducing these? Because you definitely won't have a vaccine by the time this year's out, probably, but definitely this summer.
I think they're shooting themselves in the foot a bit because, large social events in the summer especially, are going to be festivals and things like that, which are generally people my age, young people go to them. If we haven't had our vaccines, these festivals are going to suffer. I know people who are already booking tickets to these things. If they're not able to go, they're I don't know who will. It's they're definitely shooting themselves in the foot because young people are generally the people that go out in the summer, spend lots of money, do lots of big social events and things like that. I think it's totally...
About testing, I think I've just sort of thought about it. You're meant to have a negative test, and we do know that about 7 out of 10 of those at the moment are false readings. So those tests haven't been approved by the national government's own national screening committee, and there's a lot of critics of them. The whole idea of this sort of aggressive testing, we've got very low prevalence, is again about acceptable risk. The fact that you go into school every day and you're expected to take a test and then wear a mask, it's almost like you're being seen as a sort of vector of disease. How do you feel about that? And how does your generation feel about that you're not actually seen as human beings anymore, even though, you test and then expected to wear a mask? It doesn't seem to make sense.
I know. I do end up feeling a little bit like a risk, especially when I'm walking my dog and things, I walk past elderly people and they just obstinately stay in the middle of the path. They expect me to walk out into the mud away from them almost. And if I don't move really far away from them, they glare at me and give me these dirty looks like I'm something dangerous. And it's just, I don't know, you sort of end up feeling a little bit like a big problem. And you're not really. If I had the virus, I'd be asymptomatic. So I think the only people I'd be affecting would be my family, probably, because they're the people I sort of get that close to. But I don't think I would be spreading it, around to absolutely everybody if I wasn't sneezing and coughing. So and especially if we're being tested at school, it just seems ridiculous that then we have to still go through all these precautions when we know already that none of us have the virus.
Well, yeah. So Dan's saying, is there anything positive you can say for your generation that's come out of this? Obviously, it's overwhelmingly negative, actually, by the sounds of it, this period. But what do you think good has come, if anything?
I think we'll be well prepared and probably a lot more understanding of different people than a lot of other generations. I think when we end up being the ones who are in Parliament, in control of the country, we're going to be thinking more about these decisions, about the impact that we're having on the small people down at the bottom of the pecking order and things like that. Because we've been at the bottom of the pecking order, we understand what it feels like. And I think even though this is horrible at the moment, as a generation, we will be so much more almost understanding, more powerful, I think, in our decision making than most other generations have been.
Because you've all had to suffer. Yeah. And none of you has escaped that. No, that's really interesting. That's absolutely brilliant. Well, Lucy, thank you so much for joining us in Sketch Notes, and I'll look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you. That was very, very good. Thank you.